In the year 1820, in the harbor of Callao, Peru, a man stood on a dock watching his world collapse. The army of Simón Bolívar was closing in from every direction. The roads out of Lima were choked with dust and panic. And somewhere in the city, in churches, in vaults, in the private cellars of the wealthiest families in the Spanish Empire, sat a fortune so vast that no single man could count it all. That fortune needed to disappear, fast. A ship was found, a brig by the name of the Mary Dear, and what they loaded into its hull that night, quietly, under torchlight, away from prying eyes, would become the most obsessed-over treasure in the history of the world. But before we get to the gold, let me welcome you. You're watching Dead Man's Shore, the channel where real pirate history comes alive. I'm Jack. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell. And if you've been with us before, you already know. Settle in. This one is something else entirely. Now, back to the island. 5 degrees 32 minutes north, 87 degrees 4 minutes west. Those coordinates have appeared on navigational charts for centuries. They mark a small volcanic island rising out of the eastern Pacific Ocean, roughly 550 kilometers southwest of the coast of Costa Rica. Sailors call it Cocos Island, and for the past 200 years, it has driven men absolutely mad. The island itself is ancient. It is the summit of a submerged volcanic mountain born from the ocean floor somewhere between 1,900,000 and 2,400,000 years ago. It is solid basalt, dense, black, unforgiving rock, and the ocean has been trying to tear it apart ever since. It has failed. The island stands. When you approach Cocos by sea, the first thing you notice is that it does not want you there. Almost the entire coastline is sheer cliff. Vertical rock faces drop straight into white surf with no beach, no landing, no way in. There are exactly 2 places on the northern shore where a boat can come ashore at all. Everything else is a wall. The second thing you notice is the rain. Cocos Island receives more rainfall than almost any other place on Earth. Water pours from the sky for much of the year, feeding dozens of rivers and waterfalls that tumble off the cliffs directly into the sea. The interior of the island is dense jungle, dark, dripping, ancient. A place where a man could walk 10 feet off a known path and vanish completely. The Spanish navigator Juan Cabezas first recorded the island in 1526. He put it on his charts under the name Isla de Coco, the Shell Island. From that moment on, the island stopped being a rumor and became a fact. A documented, mappable, undeniable fact. But facts have a strange way of collecting secrets. The hidden coves, the fresh water, the natural shelter invisible from the open sea unless you knew exactly where to look. These features made Cocos Island useful, not to merchants, not to the crown, not to honest men of any kind. They made it useful to people who needed to disappear. The first to recognize this were the pirates. Throughout the 1700s, buccaneers operating in the Pacific used Cocos as a base. Not a home, they had no homes, but a workshop, a hiding place, a place to rest between raids on Spanish treasure ships loaded with silver and gold from the mines of Peru and Mexico. In the hidden bays called Wafer and Chatham, crews would drag their ships onto the shallows and scrape the hulls clean of barnacles and sea growth. This process, called careening, was essential. A fouled hull was a slow hull, and a slow ship meant capture, and capture meant the end of everything. While the ships were being worked on, the men hid what they carried. Not all of it. They needed operating funds. But the heaviest, most dangerous part. Heavy chests of Spanish gold were buried in the hillsides and the caves near the waterline. Some were meant to be retrieved. Others, for reasons we will never fully understand, were not. The cliffs of Cocos began to fill with names. Captains carved their identities into the rock beside the names of their ships. These inscriptions, some deep and deliberate, others hurried and rough, turned the shoreline into a stone record of everyone who had ever passed through. A rogues gallery carved into the face of the island itself. And underneath those carvings, in the soft earth and flooded caves, lay the beginnings of the legend. Now, let us talk about William Thompson. In 1820, Thompson was a merchant sea captain. By most accounts, he was a practical man, experienced, trusted, the kind of sailor that wealthy people hired when they needed something done carefully and quietly. He was not known as a reckless man. He was not known as a violent one. He was simply a captain for hire, working the Pacific trade routes out of ports along the western coast of South America. What happened to him in the harbor of Callao in the autumn of 1820 changed all of that. The Spanish authorities in Lima had a problem. Bolívar's forces were everywhere. The city was not yet taken, but every educated man in Lima understood that it was only a matter of time. The colonial empire that Spain had built across South America over 3 centuries was collapsing. And with it, the accumulated wealth of those 3 centuries was about to fall into the hands of revolutionaries. So they made a plan. They would send the wealth away by sea. What was loaded onto the Mary Dear in those frantic days is the subject of considerable debate. The legend, and it is a powerful legend, speaks of the sacred treasures of 72 Catholic churches in Lima. Gold candlesticks, jeweled chalices, altar decorations set with emeralds and sapphires, the personal savings of the wealthiest noble families in Peru, packed into heavy, iron-bound chests. And the centerpiece of everything, a life-sized statue of the Virgin Mary, cast from solid gold. The combined value of this cargo, by modern estimations, would exceed $950 million. Thompson was given his orders: take the treasure to a safe harbor, wait for instructions, guard it with your life. He was also given a Spanish escort, armed soldiers to watch over the cargo and ensure the captain did exactly as he was told. The Mary Dear sailed out of Callao. The coast of Peru dropped behind them. The Pacific spread out in every direction. And somewhere out there, on the open water, something shifted. Perhaps it was the weight of all that gold pressing against the planks beneath their feet. Perhaps it was the knowledge that they were alone, truly alone, with a fortune beyond imagining, and the only men who knew where they were going were on this ship. Perhaps it was simply the oldest temptation in the history of the sea. The cargo is here, the owners are back there, and the ocean is very wide. The Spanish escort was overpowered. The soldiers were dealt with, every last one of them. The Mary Dear was now a ship with no masters, no orders, and no allegiances. Just a crew, a captain, and a hold full of stolen empire. Thompson set a course for Cocos Island. He knew it. He had almost certainly been there before. He knew the hidden coves, the blind channels, the passages invisible from the open sea. He knew where a man could land a boat quietly and work without being seen. The unloading took days. The chests were heavy, the jungle paths were rough, and the gold statue, that enormous golden virgin, required a small army of men just to move it off the ship. According to accounts pieced together much later from the testimony of surviving crew members, Thompson made a deliberate choice not to hide everything in one place. The treasure was divided, distributed across several deep caves near the waterline, caves that flooded completely at high tide, their entrances swallowed beneath meters of churning seawater. Whatever was hidden in those caves would be invisible to anyone who did not know exactly where to look, at exactly the right state of the tide. Thompson sealed the treasure under the Pacific Ocean itself. The Spanish Navy found the Mary Dear not long after. It was not difficult. A brig wandering the Pacific without a clear destination or cargo was conspicuous enough. The ship was boarded. The hold was empty. The escort was gone. The crew was taken. Most of them went to the rope, the standard fate for men who had committed the crime they had committed against the crown of Spain. But Thompson bargained. He had something the Spanish wanted more than revenge. He knew where the treasure was. He offered to take them there. And so Thompson and one other surviving crew member, accounts vary on who exactly accompanied him, were brought ashore on Cocos Island under Spanish guard. They were taken to the edge of the jungle, and there, Thompson did what any man in his position might have done. He ran. He knew every shadow of that island. He knew the ravines and the ridges, the false paths and the real ones, the places where the undergrowth was thickest and the light was dimmest. The Spanish searched. The jungle gave them nothing. Thompson and his companions simply ceased to exist as far as the search parties were concerned. Eventually, the Spanish gave up and sailed away. They left the treasure behind. They left the island behind. And they left Thompson behind, somewhere in that green, dripping wilderness, hiding, waiting, surviving on whatever the island could provide. He eventually made his way off. How exactly is not recorded. Perhaps he signaled a passing ship. Perhaps he built something small enough to reach the mainland. The details are lost. What is known, or at least what the legend insists, is this. Thompson lived out the rest of his days in obscurity. He told almost no one what he knew. He kept the secret for decades. He lived with it, carried it, grew old with it. And then, near the very end of his life, he gave it away. The man Thompson chose to trust was a businessman named John Keating. Keating was a Nova Scotia merchant, practical, prosperous, not the kind of man you would expect to go chasing legends across the Pacific. But Thompson, by the time he found Keating, was dying. And a dying man with a secret that size does not simply let it go. He needs someone to carry it forward. He needs to believe that what he knew, what he suffered for, what he protected, will not simply vanish when he does. He gave Keating a document. Accounts describe it as a coded map, a set of markings and references that meant nothing to anyone who had not stood on Cocos Island and walked those specific paths. It was not a simple X marks the spot. It was a set of instructions written in the language of a man who had buried something and needed to be absolutely certain that only the right person could find it. Keating organized an expedition. He found a business partner, a man named Bogue, and together they sailed for Cocos. What happened on that island is known only through fragments. Keating spoke of it later in careful terms to people he trusted. The details are few, but the outline is this. Keating found something. In one of the caves near the waterline, perhaps at low tide, perhaps by following the map to a specific formation of rock, he put his hands on a chest. Small compared to the scale of the legend, but full of uncut gemstones. Even that fraction of the treasure was enough to cause disaster. The crew became aware that something significant had been found. Tensions rose with the speed that only greed can produce. In the confusion that followed, threats made, loyalties broken, Bogue vanished. He was there one moment and gone the next. His body was never found. Keating searched the coastline. Nothing. Keating eventually left the island. Whether he took anything with him and how much has never been established. He returned to Nova Scotia a changed man, wealthier, some said, than he had any right to be from legitimate trade. But he never went back to Cocos, and he never spoke clearly about what he had seen. The map passed through other hands after Keating died, or perhaps copies of it did. It is nearly impossible at this distance to know what was real and what was fabricated by men who wanted investors to fund their expeditions. What is certain is that from the mid-1800s onwards, Cocos Island became a destination. Hundreds of expeditions followed. Some were financed by serious men with serious money. Others were thrown together by dreamers and chancers who had heard the story third-hand in a tavern. They came with shovels and crowbars, and increasingly, as the decades passed, with more sophisticated equipment. They dug, they searched, they dynamited rock faces, they probed the soil with iron rods. They found nothing, or at least, nothing they ever admitted to finding. The island absorbed their labor and gave nothing back. The jungle healed every scar almost as fast as it was made. The tides washed over the cave entrances twice a day, every day, as they always had. And the Golden Virgin, if she ever existed at all, remained exactly where Thompson had left her. In the shadows, under the water, beyond reach. 500 expeditions over 150 years, and still nothing confirmed. What does that tell you? Write your theory in the comments below. I read every single one. By the late 19th century, Cocos Island had become something new, an industry. It was no longer simply a place where treasure might be found. It was a place where the idea of treasure could be sold. Investors were approached with maps and stories and promises. Expedition companies were formed and funded. Equipment was purchased. Ships were hired. The economists who eventually studied this phenomenon reached a sobering conclusion. The total amount of money spent searching for the Cocos Island treasure over 150 years had, by any reasonable estimate, already exceeded the potential market value of the treasure itself. The search had become more expensive than the prize. The island was eating real fortunes, and it was doing so faster than the jungle could cover the digging. Now, let us talk about the parts of this story that historians find uncomfortable. The Mary Deer. Archivists who have gone looking for the Mary Deer in the Spanish colonial port records of Callao have found nothing. No entry, no registration. No official record of a brig by that name docking, loading, and departing in the autumn of 1820. For a vessel involved in the transport of official state property under armed escort, the absence of documentation is striking. Without those records, the entire cargo narrative hangs in the air with nothing underneath it. There is also the question of physics. The treasure described in the legend, the gold and silver from 72 churches, plus the personal fortunes of Lima's most prominent families, plus a life-sized gold statue, would have weighed many tons. A brig of the type described, loaded with that kind of cargo, would have been dangerously unstable at sea. The calculations are not complicated. A vessel that heavy, that unbalanced, would have had serious difficulty surviving the first significant swell in open water. For the kind of cargo described in the legend, a single brig was entirely the wrong vessel. What the situation would have required was a convoy, multiple ships, military-grade transport, The kind of organized operation the colonial navy ran regularly. Not one merchant captain hired in a hurry at a crumbling dockside. Historians who have spent years with the colonial archives have put forward a difficult theory. They suggest that the legend of the Cocos Island treasure was, at least in part, deliberately constructed. A story designed to attract investment. A mechanism for separating wealthy men from their money by offering them a share in the greatest treasure hunt in history. It worked. For 150 years, it kept working. But let us hold that theory alongside another possibility, because this is where the story refuses to be simple. Even if the Mary Deer was fictional, even if the specific cargo described was exaggerated beyond recognition, Cocos Island was absolutely, demonstrably used as a hiding place by pirates operating in the Pacific throughout the 1700s. That is historical fact, confirmed by the inscriptions in the rock, by the logbooks of ships that chased those pirates, by the geography of the island itself. Things were hidden there. We know this. Whether the specific fortune Thompson allegedly buried is real, or whether it is a legend grown up around a seed of genuine history, that question has not been answered. And perhaps it never will be. Because in 1997, the question became legally moot. Costa Rica, which has sovereignty over Cocos Island, designated it a national park. That same year, UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site, one of the most protected designations on Earth. Any geological activity on the island is now forbidden. There are no exceptions for treasure hunters. The island is patrolled continuously by a dedicated ranger service and a coast guard that monitors the surrounding waters around the clock using modern surveillance systems. Anyone who lands on Cocos Island with a metal detector or a shovel faces immediate arrest and prosecution for environmental damage. The legal framework is absolute. The treasure hunt is over. Not because the treasure was found, not because the legend was finally disproved, but because the island was given a different kind of value, one that the government of Costa Rica has decided outweighs any gold beneath the soil. And perhaps that decision was easier to make because of what lives in the water around Cocos. The seas surrounding the island are among the most extraordinary in the world. Schools of scalloped hammerhead sharks, hundreds of them at a time, some reaching 2.5 meters in length, circle the underwater ridges in formations that have no parallel anywhere else on Earth. The biomass of marine life concentrated around Cocos Island represents one of the largest and most genetically significant reserves on the planet. On the island itself, species like the Cocos Island finch evolved in complete isolation over hundreds of thousands of years, developing characteristics found nowhere else in the world. The finch's beak, adapted over millennia to its specific food sources, is a small miracle of independent evolution. Costa Rica looked at all of this, looked at the gold, and made its choice. So where does that leave us? 3 possibilities remain on the table. The first is that the treasure is real, and it is still there, sealed inside flooded caves beneath the Pacific, exactly where Thompson put it in 1820, waiting for a technology and a legal framework that do not yet exist. The second is that it never left Lima, that the gold was hidden not in the ocean, but underground, in the tunnels and vaults and sealed rooms beneath the city streets. Lima has a long history of such hidden spaces. Some of them have never been fully explored. The third possibility is that the Galapagos Islands, not Cocos, were always the real destination. The Galapagos offered far more places to land quietly, far more hidden terrain, far less chance of interception. If Thompson, or whoever the real captain was, needed somewhere to disappear, the Galapagos made more practical sense. The Cocos Island story on this reading was the misdirection, the cover story, the legend planted so that no one would look in the right place. 200 years of searching, and we are still choosing between those three options. Cocos Island sits in the Pacific exactly where it has always sat. The rain falls. The waterfalls pour off the cliffs into the surf. The hammerheads circle in the deep water below. The jungle grows over everything that men have dug or carved or disturbed, healing the scars with the patience of something that has been here for 2 million years and expects to be here for 2 million more. And somewhere in that island, in its rock, in its caves, in its flooded grottos, the answer to one of history's great questions either exists or does not. We may never know which. So let me ask you one last time. Do you think the treasure is real? Is it still there? Or was the greatest treasure hunt in history also the greatest lie? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what you think. This has been Dead Man's Shore. If this story got under your skin the way it gets under mine, share it with someone who loves history. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one.